This edition of Mac Voices is brought to you by Squarespace. Everything you need to create an exceptional website. For 10% off your first purchase, use the discount code MacVoices11. Welcome to Mac Voices. This is the talk of the Mac community. I'm Chuck Joyner. Folks, Ted Landau is back in a color I've never seen him in before. Ted, you look great in sky blue. You look fantastic.
The shirt you're talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting. A few people have said that. I feel like maybe I should wear sky blue all the time.
Yeah, I think that could become your new trademark.
Uh-huh. Unfortunately, the lighting in the room is making my face less than ideally lit, but we'll make do with that.
Yeah. I don't think it makes any difference. It's just your radiant personality, Ted.
I see. Is this a fashion show that I'm on? I seem to have gotten lost as to what podcast we're doing.
I don't know. It just seems somehow appropriate to bring up. Oh, man. Well, it's been a while since we've talked to you, and one of the things I wanted to do a follow-up on, because it seemed to generate a lot of interest and even a lot of follow-up elsewhere, was your article on the Mac Pros for Macworld. We had talked about it before, but then your article came out, and then everybody got really excited.
Well, I don't know about everybody, but there were certainly a lot of comments about the article, both positive and negative. It generated a lot of positive retweets and Facebook likes, and eventually a lot of positive comments at the end of the article as well. It also generated a lot of criticism, I would say, especially right after the article. It's interesting, the trajectory of these things. Within hours of the article being posted on Macworld, there were probably like 30 or 40 comments, almost all of which were negative. And then more positive comments came over the next day or two. I don't know what that means exactly, but that seemed to be the trajectory. And the criticisms... and then I wound up actually writing a blog posting to my Slanted Viewpoint website, where I, at great length, responded to what I thought were the salient criticisms that had been made. Some of which were good, and started me thinking about things, and some of which I thought I could adequately respond to and stick to my guns. And again, for listeners that don't know exactly what we're talking about, I wrote an article. The genesis of the article is very simple. When after the new Mac Pro was announced, and especially after the initial pricing was announced this past October, I started looking into getting one because I have a 2009 Mac Pro, and it seemed like a good time for me to get a new machine. And once I started pricing it out, it became clear to me that maybe I didn't want to get one. And without going through all the details, because I think we talked about this in our last podcast, and people can read about it in the article, even assuming that I started with a base $3,000 Mac Pro, the cheapest one I can get, and then threw in a new display because I'd want a Thunderbolt display, and for the sake of argument, I said let's get Apple's Thunderbolt display, which is about $1,000. So now we're up to $4,000, and then I saw that it came with only 256 gigabytes of storage internally, and I don't have any. I can't remember the last time I had a Mac Pro or even an iMac that my wife has that had that little amount of storage. And so I figured I'd want to upgrade the storage. I might even want to upgrade the RAM to 16 gigabytes. And then, even though Apple has declared the optical drive dead, I still have 2 optical drives in my old Mac Pro, and I use it for burning DVDs on a somewhat frequent basis, and CDs as well. And so I probably want to get some optical drives. I'd be looking at, since there are no internal drive bays, I'd be looking at getting some sort of rack to mount some external drives so I can have backup drives and so on. I kept accumulating costs, and by the time I was done, I realized to get a Mac Pro, a new Mac Pro that would be pretty much a replacement for the hardware that I had now, obviously upgraded for what advances have been made over 4 years, that I would have to spend something like $5,500 was my estimate. And I think that didn't even include sales tax. And I looked and I said, I don't need this. Basically, for $5,500, it's like getting a Lamborghini almost, so I can go to the grocery store. I really don't need that much power. If the price was cheaper, I'd get that much power. Why not? If you get a Lamborghini for $20,000, maybe I'd get one. But at the price that they were pricing it at, it was out of my price range. And I felt that wasn't so much the case back in the previous generation of Mac Pro, and not only were the prices relatively less than, as I discussed in the article, but the iMac alternative was more distinctly inferior, and so it made the Mac Pro seem more important to get for someone like myself. Now, the iMac seems a lot more attractive than it was back then. Apple keeps upping the capabilities of the iMac. So the iMac is a more attractive alternative. The Mac Pro is almost priced out of my price range alternative. And so I said, when it comes time for me to replace my Mac Pro, I'm more likely to get an iMac than a new Mac Pro, given all that. And then I started thinking, there are probably a lot of users out there like me, not really professionals. I don't need to process video for a living. I'm not a high-end Photoshop user. That there are a lot of people out there like me that nonetheless got a Mac Pro last time around because it was it was better than an iMac by enough that it seemed worth spending the extra bucks to get it, and that now wouldn't do so. What I call the sort of prosumer that made a Mac Pro an affordable luxury now was looking at it maybe as an inaffordable or unaffordable luxury. And so I thought that would be an interesting article to point out that the new Mac Pro is probably going to have a smaller market appeal, that many people like myself that previously thought of themselves as candidates for Mac Pro wouldn't do so anymore. And that was the article. And so I tried to explain why. And I didn't think it was that controversial. But a lot of people took exception. I guess anytime you say something like a Mac Pro has some problems, people are going to take exception. Unfortunately, I felt a lot of the exceptions were off base, and that's where my blog entry tries to go into. I mean, some people said, essentially said, well, if you don't want a Mac Pro, don't get one. Okay, well, I thank you very much, but I didn't think that was the point of the article. And other people said, the Mac Pro isn't for you, it's for pros. Well, that's pretty much what I was saying. I didn't see that as I thought that I made that point exactly, that the Mac Pro wasn't for me, it was for pros. That was what I was trying to get across. And somehow people were assuming that wasn't what I was saying. I don't know. And there were people that disagreed with my estimates of the expense, which was a more debatable thing. Some people said, well, it isn't, if you look at it this way, it's not going to be as expensive as you suggest, and we've got into details about that. There were actually some people who wanted to argue that 256 gigabytes of storage was sufficient, and I shouldn't want more. Those people admittedly were somehow suggesting that if I wanted more, I should store it externally, and I really don't. You really don't need more than 256 gigabytes internally anymore. And that was another debate we could have. I disagreed with that, but I saw there was some basis for that argument. Then there was those that argued that the whole thing was a paradigm shift, where that I was looking at it the old way, when everything was internal, and now everything's going to be external, and that's the way things are going to be. And this is just like I was being just like people that complained when Apple dropped the floppy disk from the iMac, and people were up in arms. And now we've accepted that that's the way it is, and we'll accept external storage as being the way it is for the future. And I had some doubts about that as well. I'm not sure that maybe for the Pro that's true. I admitted that maybe for Pro users that's true, but I can't imagine that suddenly we're going to want, that the future iMac owners are going to want to look at having a hard drive array connecting to their iMac or something. I don't think that's the direction we're going for the lower end of the market. And so I talked about that, and on and on and on. So yeah, there was a healthy debate, and both positive and negative.
And I'm tempted to engage in the debate we had when we talked about the article the first time, and because I watched this with great interest, going back and forth, seeing sort of the parries and the thrusts and the gives and the takes. I guess I still think it boils down to the fact that a lot of people that think they're professionals or consider themselves professionals, need almost the validation of having something called a Mac Pro. And I just think the bar's been raised. I think the iMac, especially a higher end iMac, has become a professional machine. It wasn't at one time. There's no doubt about that, but now it is. And now the Mac Pro is for, like you said, the feature film editors, maybe not quite that high, but people in that category. So it's just a matter of definition at this point. What you want versus what you think you should be able to have, versus what you really need. I think those are three different things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, like a few years ago, if someone asked someone like us, or someone was writing an article about why you might want to go for a Mac Pro instead of an iMac, one of the things that would inevitably come up would be internal expandability. I'm sure the article at some point say, well, with an iMac, you're stuck with the hard drive that comes with it. If you want to add any more hard drive space, you pretty much have to add an external drive. With that Mac Pro, you get 4 internal bays where you can add hard drives and blah, 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 and all that sort of stuff. Well, that's gone. I mean, that may not be a bad thing, as people, as some of the critics of my article pointed out, that has some potential advantages too with the way the Mac Pro is set up with these Thunderbolt 2 ports. That may be, but at the same time, you recognize that was one reason that people got a Mac Pro before, and that reason is gone. Whether you view it as an advantage or not. The other thing that occurred to me is in line with what you were just saying, is that I think the situation has flipped. Years ago, when the iMac wasn't as powerful as it is now, and the Mac Pro perhaps cheaper than the new one will be. Years ago, it was like the iMac was for entry-level users, for low-end users, and the Mac Pro was for everybody else. If you weren't a novice, you got a Mac Pro. Now it's almost the reverse. Now it's, if you're a super high-end user, you get the Mac Pro. Otherwise, for everyone else, you get the iMac. It's just as if the center has shifted. The center used to shift towards getting the Mac Pro. Now the center has shifted towards getting the iMac.
Yeah, I agree. And I'd be remiss too if I didn't point folks to a discussion you had with Chris Breen on the Macworld podcast about this very issue. Mm. We don't want to step on that discussion because I think it delves into some different areas, and of course Chris does his usual great job. So after you listen to this, don't stop now, but after you listen to this, go over and check out the Macworld podcast, and I'll have links in the show notes too.
And hopefully this will be the last time I talk about this, because I don't feel like the topic's getting talked to death at this point.
Well, it'll probably resurface when the machine actually comes out and gets in the hands of people, and they can sort of pass judgment on the adequacy of the standard builds and the price performance situation, and just probably the daily logistics of working with some of that outboard storage.
Yeah, which actually gets to another sort of line of comments there were many professionals that commented that would say something like, well, for me, the price is more than worth it, even though it is expensive, because when I think of A, B, C, or D, I can see where it's going to save me so much money in terms of time saved that I'll make back the extra money of the Mac Pro within 3 weeks or something. I mean, probably exaggerating a little bit, but I got comments in that vein. And again, my reply to that was, yeah, that's great. I mean, you're the market for the Mac Pro. I'm not arguing that you shouldn't get one. It wasn't like I was trying to make a blanket condemnation of the Mac Pro and say it was a failure of a machine. I was saying that there were many people not like you, more like me, that felt the Mac Pro was the right machine for them 4 years ago. That likely isn't going to feel that way anymore.
You bring up another great point, though. That I guess is sort of in line with what you were saying. If you can you keep up with the Mac Pro as a user, and I don't mean you, Ted, but I just mean in general. It's got a lot of horsepower. Do you really need that horsepower? I mean, sure, we all want it. We all want that Lamborghini to go to the grocery store, but do you really need it? I mean, I find that short of rendering video, that my MacBook Pro Retina is pretty darn adequate. I've got a 27-inch iMac over here that's now a year old, and it's pretty darn adequate, for the things that I do that are not video related. With video, yeah, you need all the horsepower you can get, but so I kind of question, why people are buying this. We used to say that the hard drive was the bottleneck for storage and speed. Well, now you've got processors that are so fast. how much faster does your spreadsheet need to recalculate?
Well, I agree. That's why I think I would be content with an iMac. But you raise a point actually that I didn't discuss in the articles or anywhere else, I think, and I'll raise it now. And I think one of the reasons that I like the Mac Pro has had little to do with its speed compared to the iMac in the end. It was the flexibility of the internal storage. I like the idea, for instance, like my Mac Pro came with a standard hard drive back in 2009, as they all did. At some point, I started reading all this stuff about how flash drives were, the way to go. The MacBook Air had this flash drive, and the disk access time was unbelievably fast. And OWC started coming out with flash drives that you could put into a Mac Pro. So I got one. I slapped it in there, and at the time I couldn't afford. I think I actually got 256 gigabytes, which was not sufficient. So I had a setup where I now had my operating system and applications on the solid state drive, and all my data on the next bay over in the internal drive, and it was a very nice setup. And similarly. At one point, I think I don't think it may not have been for this Mac Pro, maybe even for the previous generation, where I had a FireWire port that stopped working, and it was going to be an expensive repair. And rather than repair it, I just got a PCI FireWire card and slapped it in there. And so then I had FireWire support again, and I could, and actually at one point I don't think I could have done it with this Mac Pro, but some of the newer Mac Pros supported throwing in a USB 3 card, so you could get USB 3 support on a Mac Pro, even though it didn't come standard with the machine, just by adding a PCI card. If you got one DVD drive, one optical drive with the Mac Pro, and decided later that you wanted to have two because you wanted to do disk-to-disk copying more conveniently, there was a second bay there. They had a second optical disk drive, no problem. And on and on and on. It just gave you, after you bought it, it was you could tinker with it. You could add things, subtract things, and I liked having that sort of flexibility. With the new Mac Pro, anything like that you want to do, you're going to have to do externally, and I guess that can be okay. It isn't. It's somehow aesthetically, I don't like the idea. Chris and I talked about this a little bit. I'm not as big a fan on having everything connected by cables and having to have a bunch of cables and bays and external devices sitting on my desk next to the Mac Pro. I mean, part of the nice thing about the Mac Pro is it's 1/3 the size of the old machine. I don't want to reduce that advantage by having to have a large peripheral array sitting right next to it. But if you're doing it for a living, you probably don't care about those aesthetics as much. So it's just a way of looking at it, I guess.
Yeah, and that's the one thing about the new Mac Pro design that does surprise me a little bit. As much as Apple has been anti-cable and trying to get away from that, this almost assures that you're going to have something external, something connected by a cable. And there's really no other way, unless you're doing some kind of wireless that I can't really think is terribly effective. So that was the one place in that design that there's no opportunity, like you say, for the internal storage. Again, a philosophical change, or maybe somebody will come up with a performance justification, but it did seem a little surprising.
But we'll see how it turns out, like you said.
Yeah.
Well, we can come back here, and either I'll be drowning in clam chowder, or saying this is exactly what I predicted. We'll see.
Knowing you, I wouldn't bet against you. Today's edition of MacVoices is brought to you by Squarespace, the all-in-one platform that makes it fast and easy to create your own professional website or online portfolio. For a free trial and 10% off your first purchase, go to squarespace.com and use the discount code MacVoices11. That's MacVoices11. You are a person on the go. Your busy lifestyle doesn't allow you the luxury, or burden, depending on how you look at it, of sitting at a desk or workstation. You need to get things done when the opportunity or inspiration strikes. So it's a good thing you built your website with Squarespace, because updating and managing your Squarespace site has never been easier or more powerful. The new blog app from Squarespace lets you do all the work of drafting, scheduling, and posting from your iDevice. That means from the coffee shop, from a waiting room, from a park bench. Wherever you are, you can be updating your site with that critical information that just can't wait. And because the information is critical, people will be talking about it. That's why the blog app lets you monitor and manage the comments as they pour in. And let's not forget layout engine support, so you have full control over how that critical information gets presented. You also want to know how your critical information is being received by your audience and the internet in general. That's why Squarespace's Metrics app is so useful. With stats on page views, unique visitors, and even monitoring your site's Twitter and Facebook visitors, you can find out whether the information you think is critical is being viewed the same way by others, and adjust the presentation and content accordingly. Those are just 2 more reasons that you need to build your site with Squarespace. I want you to find out just how easy it is and how much fun it can be by signing up for a free, no credit card required trial of Squarespace. You can tweak, customize, and personalize the site to your heart's content for a full 2 weeks. Then make it your own and take 10% off making it your own when you use the code MacVoices11. That's 10% savings with the code MacVoices11. And let me know how you make out. My email is chuck@macvoices.com. I'm anxious to hear about your Squarespace experience and to feature your amazing website on the show. Squarespace. Everything you need to create an exceptional website. Thanks to Squarespace for sponsoring this edition of Mac Voices. So, Ted, another thing that we have on the list, this time of year, a lot of people are, assessing what gifts to get and really, if they have any sense, they're probably assessing what services that they continue to use. And Netflix is one that is just unbelievably popular. Whether you're a cord cutter or not, it seems like everybody has a Netflix account and uses it pretty aggressively. But you've been having a few issues, I think, or challenges with Netflix?
Yeah, Netflix is everywhere. I think I got a toaster oven that came with Netflix as an option. So in case you want to toast a bagel and watch a movie at the same time, you can do it. They're pretty aggressive, Netflix. Yeah, the issue that I've had, it actually started a few weeks ago. And I'm not sure what it coincided with. It was around the time that there was an update to the Apple TV, though as it turned out, it had nothing to do with the Apple TV because I started seeing it in other Netflix devices I have, including my toaster oven. And I think it was also around the time that Netflix switched upgraded to offering Super HD for some of their shows and movies. But I'm not quite sure of that because I wasn't tracking it that carefully. But in any case, what happened is shows that I used to, I was watching, I think I first noticed it when I was watching the latest season of Mad Men that's available on Netflix, which I was catching up on. And I was watching, and it's in Super HD. And it looked tremendous. Breaking Bad was another series I was watching that looks tremendous in Super HD. But I mean, there's a scene in Breaking Bad where they're in the desert, and I swear you could see the individual grains of sand and count them. I mean, it's really, when you get that Super HD coming across, it's really tremendous. And then all of a sudden, it sort of just vanished. And worse than vanished, it became worse than standard definition. Like I'd start watching Mad Men, and for about 3 or 4 seconds, it would seem fine, and then there'd be this sort of hiccup where the audio would pause for a second and maybe the video would freeze for a second. And then when it came back, the quality was 100 times worse. Like I said, worse than standard definition even. It was almost unacceptably bad. It was just one step above unacceptably bad. And like I said, at first I thought maybe, since I was using my Apple TV, I thought, well, it must be the Apple TV. And I started fiddling with that and reset the Apple TV. I logged in and out of Netflix. Maybe if I logged back into it, that would help. I stopped the show and restarted the show. I did just about anything I could think of. Nothing helped. And so I started, doing some sort of process of elimination troubleshooting and looked, and I saw, well, when I went to HBO Go, it was perfectly fine. When I rented a movie in iTunes, it was perfectly fine. But when I went to my Blu-ray player and selected Netflix from my Blu-ray player, it was just as bad as on the Apple TV. So it seemed pretty clear that the problem was with Netflix anywhere I went and only with Netflix. So my logical assumption, I think anybody's logical assumption at that point, would be the cause of the problem is Netflix. And so I went on Netflix's website and initiated an online chat with one of their representatives, and wound up having like a half-hour little chat with them back and forth. They're very sympathetic, and they admitted that Netflix is kind of a bandwidth hog, and especially with the Super HD. But then their contention, however, was the problem is Comcast, because it's my ISP. I'm sure the problem would have been whatever ISP I had, but they were blaming it on Comcast, and they said that what happens is that, and it is true that the problem was definitely worse at busiest times of day. Like if I watched something at 8 o'clock at night, the problem was there for sure. If I watched something at 2 o'clock in the morning because I had insomnia that night, I was likely to get the Super HD. It wasn't guaranteed, but it was much more likely. So they were claiming, because with Comcast, the delivery of your content can be affected by how many people are on your node at the same time using it and slowing things down and blah 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 blah. They essentially said that when Netflix kicked in, there was a signal drop, and Comcast couldn't support the Super HD, and I needed to contact Comcast about boosting their signal. And I said, well, it seems a little strange to me that you're saying this, because why wouldn't it then be a problem when I used HBO? Why? And they said, well, they sort of hemmed and hawed about that, but essentially said, no, maybe Netflix requires more than HBO, but still, the problem is Comcast. And I said, okay, I'll call Comcast, but I know where this is going. And it isn't going any place that I'm going to be happy with. I can just imagine myself explaining to Comcast why a problem that only exists with Netflix is somehow Comcast's fault. And sure enough, that's exactly where I wound up. I called Comcast, and they were actually pretty reasonable. We did some speed tests. My speed was perfectly fine. I was actually getting a pretty amazing, according to a couple of different web-based speed tests, getting more than 50 Mbps, which was pretty cool. And then I went downstairs and started a Mad Men episode, saw the quality drop, went back to my computer, and it was still showing greater than 50 Mbps. So at least with my crude analysis, I couldn't see any big drop in Comcast signal strength that would account for it. And they said the same thing. They said, there's nothing we can see that would be causing that to happen on our end. There's nothing we can do. You have to call Comcast. You have to call Netflix back and tell them that it's their issue. And I said, yeah, I knew that was going to be what was going to happen. Anyway, I wound up, I was actually going to call Netflix back yesterday or today. I haven't been able to bring myself to do it. I got involved in a Twitter conversation with some people who, I wrote this up actually, this little problem with Netflix. I wrote this up back in the beginning phases of it, didn't have all the details, for a Bugs and Fixes column on Macworld. And then I came across a Twitter conversation where somebody was having problems with Netflix and cited my article, so I became aware of it. And they said that one person said they've called Netflix like 6 times to complain about this, and every time they call, they blame it on the ISP, and they won't budge from that. They just say it's the ISP's fault. And so that sort of discouraged me from wanting to call Netflix at this point, because I didn't really want to start calling them liars. I wasn't really in the mood for that, but that's where I would be heading. And so I'm not sure. It's very frustrating. I'm not sure what to do. I get this horrible quality video a lot of the time, and Comcast is claiming they can't fix it. Netflix is claiming they can't fix it. Nothing is getting fixed, short of just dropping Netflix altogether, which I don't really want to do. I'm not sure what the solution is at this point, so it's very frustrating.
Ted, since you're talking, well, first of all, let's go back here. Do you have an option at this point to stream it in HD or Super HD or SD, or is it just they offer it to you only in the highest resolution they can find?
Well, if you go to Netflix's website and go log into your account, there's a place where you can select what you want, and one option is automatic, which presumably means that they will try to optimize it for the best that they can support at the moment. And that's how I had things set. And so at one point I thought maybe that's the problem. So there is an option to just say HD, demand HD, no matter what. And so I selected that option. Now it's not clear to me how that translates across devices. Is that really affecting just when I'm playing it through their web interface, or does it affect their Netflix app on my Apple TV? I'm not quite sure. But I hoped that it had an effect, but it had no effect whatsoever.
Because I'm wondering, it's interesting. We're had the discussion about the Mac Pro and the interfaces. Mm-hmm. I'm just wondering if their servers are having trouble punching out the Super HD. If it's just so much bandwidth that their hardware isn't up to speed yet.
Well, that's my guess. I mean, you have to assume at this point that the problem is with Netflix's servers not being able to meet the demand, and for some reason. I mean, I guess it's understandable, but for some reason they don't want to admit it. I can understand they would want to be reluctant to admit it, but when they fly into fantasy land in an effort not to admit it, that's a bit much.
Yeah, because they're starting to offer more and more programming in the Super HD, which I haven't read the specs yet, but that's a lot of data to push out.
Oh yeah, and I don't have the exact numbers at my fingertips, but I think Netflix has become so huge. I think something like on an average night, like 60 to 70% of the internet traffic is Netflix streaming. I mean, it's just incredible. So yeah, but I wouldn't care so much if they said to me, "Yeah, it's our problem. We're working on it. It could be 3 or 4 months before we get it fixed, but we're going to do it." I could see where someone might want to say, "Well, while you're taking your 3 or 4 months, I don't want to pay for this service. Give me a refund or something like that, or give it to me for free." And then maybe they don't want to deal with those sort of complaints. But I wouldn't say that. I mean, I would say, okay, I could give them 3 or 4 months and let them work on it. But at least I know I'd have a deadline. I'd say, okay, I can mark my calendar and say, this is when it's going to be better, and I'll contact them again if it isn't better by then. And now I know that somebody's working on the solution. But instead, I just get, it's not our fault. It's not our fault. We're not doing anything about it because it's not our fault. And so that's what's frustrating.
It's really interesting. In today's world, the expectations are almost as important as the actual delivery. Mm-hmm. If you set the expectations lower and hit them and maybe exceed them, people are a lot happier than if you set the expectations higher and then go the other direction. And I'm kind of with you, and I know you're right. There are going to be people that say, well, you advertise this and I'm not getting that, but is it any worse than you are advertising that right now and you're not delivering? Sooner or later, if it happens enough or long enough, there's going to be a backlash and it's not going to be pretty.
Yeah, I'm willing to cut them some slack. Maybe I'm more generous than some, but it's not totally unlike, to enter the political arena briefly, the Obamacare website was which has been a disaster in terms of getting it to work. Well, I'm willing to say I can be very critical on the one hand that it was so screwed up from the beginning because I don't think it should have been. But given that it's that screwed up, I can cut them some slack and say, okay, I see that you're working on it. It's a high priority. Hopefully next week, 2 weeks, a month from now, hopefully the day will come when we can look back and say that those problems are in our rearview mirror, and wasn't it funny how bad it was back then. And so I cut them some slack, and I would do the same thing with Netflix, but at least the Obamacare situation, the Obama administration has owned up to the fact that it's a disaster. They're not saying it's Comcast's fault. So that's the big difference, and that's why I'm getting pretty pissed off.
Yeah, folks, I think Ted's trying to bait me into a political discussion. I'm not going there. Going there. Although I that would have been great if they had come out and said it's Comcast's fault. That would have been a riot. It's just when you have a service like Netflix that is almost becoming a borderline utility, at this point. I mean, that's the way we all look at Comcast for TV delivery and for internet service, and now Netflix is fast approaching that, and that comes with a whole new set of expectations, and hopefully not regulatory oversight. Hopefully they can avoid that by performing. But if they don't, then we may have a whole new set of issues to deal with.
And let me be clear, it isn't just me or one or two other users. As I've looked into this, I've seen numerous reports of this on the web. It's a pretty widespread issue.
Well, I sincerely hope they get it resolved, because I think they are a great service. They do a great service for a lot of people that are looking for alternatives to cable. So,
no, I agree. That's why I have it.
Yeah. We shall see. We shall see. We will be rooting for them. Yeah.
And I'll let you know if I call them again, and we can follow up on this next time.
Yeah. See how many calls you make to each one where they're saying it's his fault.
That's right.
Well, I wanted to take a little time on Dr. Landau's couch.
My technical couch.
Not your real couch. Your technical couch. Ted, I wanted to share this because a lot of times we sit and joust and jest, and it's almost become a meme about Microsoft and the Windows side. But I discovered this week just how spoiled I am as a Mac user, you are as a Mac user, everybody out there as a Mac user is. I've had the opportunity or the burden, depending on your point of view, of setting up a brand new PC. And I was staggered. And I'm going to do my best to not let slip any proper names, because I don't want to slander anybody. But I bought it from a reseller, a local reseller, and they did a great job. They were very professional, very pleasant to deal with. But it comes from the company that manufactures it, and the amount of crapware that was on there was amazing. And maybe a lot of folks out there are not going to find this terribly surprising, but I was amazed at that. I was amazed at the process of going through and getting up and running and having on a brand new machine. And by the way, we did opt for Windows 7 instead of Windows 8. We did not go the whole way up to 8. So
I didn't even know you could still do that.
Yeah, well, apparently so. You have the option then to go ahead and upgrade, but the process of going through this and the number of updates, even on Windows 7, that had to be downloaded on a brand new machine. The fact that one of the main reasons that we went this direction was because the bank does not support fully the Macintosh platform. They rely on Explorer. Now, if it had been up to me, I'd have fired the bank. But I couldn't.
It wouldn't even work if you got a Mac and then use Boot Camp to run it as a Windows machine or something like that.
They could not endorse it. They could not assure us that would work. I saw no reason it wouldn't, but they could not guarantee. But one other problem was that we have a check reader that needed to interface with it, and they definitely could not endorse that would work in a virtual machine. And at some point, it becomes the path of least resistance, or so I thought. Just updates, and by the way, the bank said do not use what is it, Internet Explorer. Is it 10 or 11? Whatever's the brand new version. I think it's 10. So we were very careful. Windows 7, and I think I'm getting the 10s and 11s right, folks. Please forgive me if I'm not. But what?
I forgive you.
Thank you. So we made sure Internet Explorer 10. Great, we're set. Guess what? Overnight, it updated itself to Internet Explorer 11. And then I had to go through the process of taking out 11 and then re-downloading 10. Well, that was a disaster. I mean, the number of restarts required, the number of places to go to uninstall this stuff, amazing. I
would have thought that would have been better by now. I mean, that's the way it was back in Windows XP. I mean, but you think they would have improved it by now. But
yeah, and so then we went to download the latest version of some of our accounting software, which by the way, at this particular time, it was time to go from the 2013 version to the 2014 version. Okay, fine. So we just download the 2014 version. So I go to the website, click buy. 3 days it took me to receive the license key and the download information. 3 days.
You just mean 3 days where nothing happened and then it suddenly appeared, or 3 days while it was actually transmitting back and forth? Or what do you mean by 3 days?
No, 3 days from the day I gave them my credit card and clicked buy. And and they said, thank you, and we will send you your license key and the download information.
Oh, and it took 3 days for it to arrive. I see. Yeah. Gotcha. Like you got an email with it or something. It took 3 days for the email to arrive.
Yeah, for the email to arrive, not U.S. Postal Service, not Pony Express.
Right. You should have that email within 3 minutes sometimes, but not 3 days.
Yeah, just absolutely incredible. And then, of course, the hoops you have to jump through that you don't really see on the Mac, where you download an installer program, and then the installer program downloads the real program, and then it has to go through all its gyrations. I just sat there and I thought, as Mac users, we are so spoiled because we don't have the administrator box pops up once in a while, but not like this. And oh, by the way, while we're installing everything else, all the crapware keeps popping up and says, we'd like to make this change. We'd like to install that toolbar. It just, I think about the ease, and I know that for some developers, the Mac App Store has not been the best thing in the world. But I think I really got an appreciation for why Apple has gone the direction they have. They're trying to make it seamless. They're trying to make it easy. You and I want to geek around and play around, but Apple is trying to make it for the people that don't want that easy. And I'm still staggered. I'm still absolutely staggered because I had not delved into that part of the PC experience in a long time. I've done plenty of maintenance. God knows I've done a lot of maintenance, and that's one issue. But this one, I tell you, if you haven't done it, if you can handle the frustration, you really should try it, because you will come away and go back to Apple and say thank you for all the efforts, all the things. Yes, you may be taking away some of our geek fun, but as a usable device, you can get up and running so much faster with a Mac. Again, I was just staggered.
All right. Well, in the interest of fairness, I would make one caveat to what you're saying, and that is
Please.
That people tend to find what they're used to more familiar and easier. And so I imagine if there was some PC person listening to this, and probably there aren't any PC people that listen to this, but if there was some PC person that listened to this, they might say, yeah, but I've seen it go the other way. I've been happily using a PC for years, and then I had to try to set up my friend's Mac, and boy, I couldn't figure this out, and I couldn't figure this out, and the App Store this and this that, and there's all sorts of things that are quirky about Macs that you guys never even think about because you're just so used to it. And so I can imagine that somebody coming back with that sort of criticism. I could also imagine thinking that they're wrong, I think we have to be wary that there's that aspect of it, and that some of what you're finding might simply be an issue of it's not what you're used to. But that said, I certainly agree with you. That's why I'm using a Mac. To be honest with you, I've installed Windows on my Mac periodically over the years and played with the latest versions of Windows and been a little frustrated from time to time. The last time I actually owned a PC and tried to set it up from scratch was back in the late 90s. So we're talking like 14 years ago now, and 15 years ago. And I found it so frustrating then that I gave up. I mean, the truth is, actually what happened is a little interesting story. It was back in the dark days before Steve Jobs' return to Apple became clear that this was going to make Apple successful again. And things had gotten. I was contracted to write a book for PeachPit on using the internet. And they were fairly insistent that I write it as a cross-platform book. They didn't want it to be about how to use the internet on a Mac. They wanted it to be how to use the internet no matter what computer you had, because they were worried that the Mac wouldn't be around, and then the book would be useless, or that nobody would buy it because only 3 people were using the Mac. And so I agreed. And I bought a gateway PC running Windows 98, I think, at the time. And eventually XP. And I mean, it wasn't terrible, but after a while, it just, the end of the story is I returned the advance and gave up on writing the book, because I said there's no way that I can spend the amount of time I need in front of a PC to get this book done. It's just not going to happen. I have better things to do with my life. And again, that might be me. I mean, I obviously had a bias towards liking the Mac better, but boy, it was a bad experience, and I'm not bore you with all the details. Some of them I don't even remember. I just remember the bad feeling. but yeah, so I can be sympathetic to what you're saying.
And you make a very fair point that there is always a familiarity factor. But I think I'm being reasonably objective in the number of restarts required and just the hassles and the instructions to uninstall Explorer, and the fact that, of course, that Windows is kind of notorious for doing the upgrades sort of behind your back. And that box was checked on automatically, and that cost me 2 or 3 hours because overnight it decided to upgrade itself. So I'm telling you, I think if you're a Mac user, or if you are thinking about becoming a Mac user, or someone that's thinking about it, push them that way, because you're just going to give them hours of their life back.
Now, I don't know how things are now with Windows 8 or even 7, because I haven't played with it enough. But that was what you're raising is one of the things that used to drive me crazy about PCs. Like most Mac applications don't absolutely require an installer. For instance, if you have an application running on your, say, iMac, and you connect your MacBook to it via Wi-Fi or an Ethernet connection, you can actually pretty much, like, almost the equivalent of dragging that application from your iMac to your MacBook. And when it's on your MacBook, you can double-click it and it runs. That's the end of it. If you tried to do something like that on a PC, up until, like I said, I haven't looked at the latest iterations of Windows, but if you tried to do that with any of the older versions of Windows that I'm more familiar with, it would never work. You have to go through all this reinstall, download, install wizard, multiple restarts that you're talking about. And if it's still that way, I think it's just terrible.
I can't speak for Windows 8, but I can tell you on 7, that's exactly what I've done for the past 2.5 days to try to get this machine just back. And by the way, folks, we're not talking about a lot of surprising things. We're talking about installing Microsoft Office 365. We're talking about installing a major accounting program. We're talking about just getting the machine set up and running to be productive. Definitely nothing high end. And it just don't. Just don't.
Well, I don't think you'll get much argument from the typical people that listen to this podcast. So.
Yeah. If anybody disagrees with me or wants to tell me I'm wrong, feel free. Chuck at MacVoices.com. I'm not sure I'll listen, but I'll certainly thank you for the email. Well, Ted, it's great to see you. Thanks so much for sharing the Mac Pro observations and the Netflix observations, and thank you for the use of your couch.
You're welcome. My bill will be coming in a couple of weeks. I'll send an email, but I don't want to send it too fast.
Yeah, at least 3 days, please.
That's right. It'll take at least 3 days to get that.
Ted, we'll do it again soon. Thank you.
Okay, it's always fun.
Yeah. Folks, this therapy edition of Mac Voices, I'll have links in the show notes to Ted's articles and his websites and everything, so you can go check those out. And please go check out Ted's conversation with Chris Breen on the Macworld podcast on the Mac Pro issue. I think you'll enjoy it. Until the next time, I'm Chuck Joyner. Thanks for watching. Visit MacVoices.com for links, show notes, to subscribe, to connect with Chuck on Twitter, app.net, Google+, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Subscribe to our weekly newsletter, the Mac Voices Dispatch, to stay up to date with all the latest MacVoices news from our front page or at macvoices.com/newsletter. Advertising and sponsorships handled by Backbeat Media at backbeatmedia.com.